every human being, irrespective of where they live on this planet, has an aspiration to live a good life. And of course that begs a question: what is a good life? But the mere fact that we are capable of having that conversation across borders, across cultures, is something to marvel at. And I think that's what knits us together. Well, I do have a vision for how we might respond particularly to the current circumstances in which we find ourselves. If I can just take one example, the world as I speak is now suffering one of the most significant and adverse financial calamities that we've seen in 2-3 generations. And some people are saying that it's been caused by a failure of regulation. My view is to say, in fact, it's not so much a failure of regulation as a failure of ethics, because I think that at the deepest level what we're seeing is a kind of forgetting that's taken place in relation to all of our institutions. And by that I don't just mean institutions like universities, but it includes businesses, the market itself, the rule of law and the system of justice attached to it, the role of government. And in each of those cases what you can see is that people betray the very idea which established those institutions in the first place. What it might mean to refound institutions, it's to ask them to go beyond a period in which they've forgotten the central purpose for which they exist. Where they go back to their roots, to the earliest conversations around what defined the purpose they were going to serve in society, and they see if they can recall that, remember what are the core values and principles which are supposed to inform them and their purpose. I'd like us to have a conversation in which we ask questions about why institutions exist, what purpose they're going to serve. And even though it may be that we come up with the same answers that our ancestors arose, the difference will be that, say, for the first time in hundreds of years, the answers will be our own. There's a famous quotation from Socrates that the unexamined life is not worth living. I think he was not just saying that it's good to think about what you do before you do it, but rather he was making a comment about what it means to be a human being, what it means to live a good life. As far as we know, are the only form of being that can transcend instinct and desire and make conscious ethical choices. Let's just look at what happens when institutions lose their way, when they engage in hypocrisy and betray themselves. One of the most spectacular over the last 15, 20 years has been the fate of the Christian churches. For 2,000 years, they voluntarily put forward the idea that love is more important than the law, that people are more important than property, that you should face the truth about yourself and your place in the world. And then, when faced with the challenge of allegations that their clergy have sexually abused children and other vulnerable people, how do they respond? They put the law before love. They put property before their people. They seek to protect their backs rather than face the truth. And they do so and cause a profound loss of trust. Not because they betrayed somebody else's claim about what they should be, but because they betrayed their very own claim, made over thousands of years. You look at courts. Courts established as a repudiation of the bully, as a place in which the rule of law is supposed to apply to all. And you ask now when you look at it, is it true that all stand equally before the law, or do the rich and the powerful have a better deal? Where institutions betray the things they say, the effect on the human spirit is quite devastating, because what it does is it says to people engaged with those institutions, hang on, they don't seem to believe what they say, so why should I? The natural response to hypocrisy is to say, okay, well, I won't believe anything that they say, and I probably won't believe anything that anybody else says either, because I'm sick of being disappointed. And if I can't trust them to be true to the things that they say that they believe, what will I do? Well, I'll look after myself. So it promotes a kind of inward selfishness, which is destructive of the bonds of human communities. The institution itself, whether it's a business or any other kind of institution, would say, before we do anything else, we need to know who we are and what we stand for. So the conversation begins by the organisation saying, these are our core values and principles. The next step is to say we will have a forensic examination of the things we do. We'll look at our systems, our policies, our structures, and to see whether they're consistent with those things that we say are good and right. If not, we need to change them. And we will recruit and try and retain people who have a similar kind of worldview. Now, if you're an employee of such an organisation, or you're participating in a community group, or you're a judge in a court, or whatever it happens to be, then you're going to say, beyond the point of, oh, I just do this because everybody does it, actually, what are the values and principles that define the purpose of this organisation and how it conducts itself? And if I see something which doesn't make sense, then I will ask a question. And yes, that will require a degree of moral courage to do so, but it will also allow the conversation to take place. Now, this is critical then, that you get a form of leadership that's at work within institutions. What the job of a great leader is to subvert unthinking custom and practice, never to accept that something is done simply because it's always been done. The point is that you think, and that you're honest with yourself about what you actually do and how it relates to what you've declared to be the defining framework of values and principles which is supposed to shape your conduct. All that is needed for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. What do you do when you see something which you believe to be wrong? Do you stay silent? Do you just go with the flow? Or do you occasionally take a risk and exercise the moral courage to say, hang on, we say this but we do that, how come? What about your own decisions? Let's suppose you're the kind of person who thinks that dolphins matter, that they're a beautiful life form. When you go into the supermarket, 2 cents more a tin for dolphin-safe tuna, do you buy it? Or do you go for the thing which is cheaper? There are day-to-day questions in families, in workplaces, that every one of us needs to confront. I would want to see a framework in which we begin to build capacity within organisations, starting in schools, where people can actually have the capacity to engage in ethical reasoning and developing the dispositions and skills to exercise moral courage based on a competent framework. We've been developing and promoting tools into secondary schools where every subject, whether it's science, maths, English or whatever, you can look at the ethical dimension of what's going on in a text or in an experiment. You don't have to actually add material into the curriculum. These tools are there, but it's very, very difficult to get them taken up because there are other priorities that are crowding things like this out of the agenda. So there's a whole range of people who can be making decisions at a very practical level which affect the way the world operates and which would give effect to this notion that people should live an examined life in their world of work and at home and right across everything they do. Politicians should be able to take an approach to the way in which they advance their proposals during elections which shy away from the easy hits. It's very easy to try and get elected on the basis of fear and greed. They can say as politicians, we recognise that amongst the competing priorities with which we have to deal, equipping our society to make more responsible decisions is a good thing to do. Now, why would you do it? You just have to look at the consequences of not doing it. The global financial meltdown. Or you could look at the environmental disaster that awaits us if we cannot go beyond our limited self-interest and take a broader view about our obligations to others. The consequences of getting this wrong are truly terrible. If I was talking directly to any leader in any kind of institution, I'd challenge them first of all to ask if they are really leading or merely pretending to do so. So I'd say to a leader, are you prepared to lead? Because if you are, it's going to require the moral courage to challenge your own organisation wherever you find unthinking custom and practice. I refuse to allow myself to be condemned to despair by those who tell me that, or anybody else for that matter, simply to be realistic, because that's what the powerful always do to keep you in your box. And the reason why I continue to be hopeful is because I see in every generation a spark to find meaning in the things that they do and in their life. It's strong in me and it's strong in almost everybody I meet, and I think as long as that's there and we don't crush it, then we've got every reason to believe we can make the changes that we ought to make.